intention underlies all aspects of our life, essentially everything that we do. And the Buddhist teachings, the origination of the mindfulness teachings talked about this, essentially saying all things rest on the tip of intention. And that meaning that our underlying motivations, conscious and unconscious, have a great influence on our impact and on what we see in our world, in ourselves and around us. And therefore, it's really significant to get to know our motivations. And this is so much of what our practice can be about, is developing an attention that can see at deeper levels, both inside of us and around us. And so when you think of our mindfulness practice, how we practice coming back to the breath, how we practice noticing, how we practice seeing and experiencing thoughts, sensations, and sounds. This is where we are practicing noticing what is. And part of that noticing is noticing our intention. So what is motivating us? What is motivating us beneath the surface action? So this is the practice of getting familiar with intention. And we all, let's be honest, we all have mixed intentions. And when we come into a practice like a mindfulness practice, we might hear about things like, oh, these are good intentions to have. It's good intention to be generous, to be loving, to be compassionate. And it's true, those are really powerful intentions. But the thing about an intention that's really confusing is that in our Western culture, intentions are often taught as something like, oh, I can just pick up an intention and put it on and it will sort of manifest in the world. But if you think about intentions as something that come from below rather than above, you can start seeing it differently. So, for instance, I was actually thinking about how years ago I was helping a friend apartment shop, and we were going around and looking at apartments, and there was this one that said, newly renovated, new paint, all this kind of stuff. And we went to see it. And you could walk in and you could see on the surface that they put up like, oh, some fresh paint, a couple of new appliances. But on closer inspection, it was like a veneer over an apartment that was falling apart. If you've ever been apartment shopping, especially in like a urban area or, could be anywhere where things are in high demand, you can see, oh, there's this projection of something like, oh, this is a renovated apartment. It's new. It looks great. But on closer inspection, you can see through the cracks that something else is at play. And when we see through the cracks, that is like us getting to understand our intention. Knowing that we could do all of these great actions, but if they're not aligned with an underlying resonant motivation, something is going to feel strange. We might even go about with all of the appearances of a good practice, of a good life, of a good action, but underneath it, something is askew. And so that's why in this practice, we prioritize what is beneath. What is beneath the action? I actually think of a story of a teacher friend, Ed Brown from the Zen tradition, and he has a great story about this, about how, in the midst of his Zen training, after, so much time sitting, in the Zen tradition where when the people are meditating, they're sitting and facing a wall, and it's, many hours and sort of this silent, you're kind of in your own bubble of meditation, like we do when we're meditating, right? And in this case, facing the wall. And he said there was suddenly a moment where it dawned on him as he was sitting in this cold room facing this wall, essentially inside, by himself. Wait a minute, am I just playing out my earliest experiences of life of being in an incubator after I was born, isolated from the rest of the world, just probably staring at a wall or a ceiling. And is that what's playing out here? Now, clearly, it probably wasn't the only thing, but certainly there are all kinds of things inside of us that are constantly affecting our motivation, our intention, and some good, some mixed, some could be seen as negative. The whole kit and caboodle. There's all of it in there. And so part of our practice is to get curious. You can even say like, well, what's motivating my practice? Certainly for me, when I was, first engaging in long practice, there was both this aspiration to want to see more deeply, to want to understand, to understand where I was in delusion and confusion, and to actually develop some more wisdom and have a greater responsiveness in the world. And there was also a motivation where, for me, it was really uncomfortable being in the world amongst people. I really didn't understand relationships. I always found them confusing, like engaging with other people, friendships, relationships, the whole spectrum. And there was some relief in the solitude of practice. So in some ways, I was motivated by a fear and confusion of being around people, and I got some relief through being in solitude. And so you might start to look for yourself and be like, what's really motivating me here? And it doesn't mean we necessarily, throw out the baby with the bathwater, like, oh, get rid of your meditation practice. It was just an escape. But we can refine our intention and be more aware of what's actually motivating us. And I have to say, years ago, it wasn't actually that long ago, a couple of years ago, I was teaching with Tony Robbins, and he has a great list of basically, what are he calls them, I think, I wrote them down here. There's sort of these basic human needs we all need, and we can actually reflect on how these motivate us. And he calls them certainty, significance, variety, connection, growth, and contribution. And those would sound like all really positive intentions, right? Like, oh, to have those things. But also we can look at, how do they start motivating us? How does our need for certainty start motivating our actions? How does our need for significance start motivating our actions? And so we can start seeing like, oh, where am I motivated by, it can look on the surface like I'm doing something great, but underneath it, I'm motivated by significance. I'm motivated by control. I'm motivated by my need for certainty. And the purpose of this exploration is not to nitpick ourselves to pieces and to somehow attain some great spiritual ideal, because that's where we can go with this stuff, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I need to become the most pure being on earth so that, I feel right. It's more about understanding and seeing, so that we can be aware and we can adjust. Or we can be even aware and have some humility. As we know, a fruit of the spiritual practice is this humility to say like, oh, yeah, look at that. I am motivated by some need for certainty. And maybe that will temper us. Maybe that will help us refine our wisdom. So this is the process, is with some humor and curiosity to look and to see what is motivating me and what is motivating, the actions of people around us, and to have some curiosity, and then to actually have some compassion to see we all have these fundamental needs, and how might they be coming out in our actions that look good, actions that look bad, but ultimately can be even motivated by the same thing.